Hello, my name is Zadone. This is my Metacognitive Reflection video for English 413, UNM Fall 2016 rather. So I'll just jump right in. In this course we reviewed 4 genres of scientific writing, reviewed in terms of form and content, but we also discussed things in terms of context, purpose, and rhetorical meaning. To start off this video, I'd like to jump into some discussion we had in the final section of the course about the rhetoric of science. Science is voiceless. Science by itself is unopinionated, useless, and emotionless. It belongs to no one, it's a cognitive construct, and exists outside of the imagination. Our imagining of it changes it into a concept of science rather than the pure science that I just defined. Writing about science, communicating about it, is what gives it use and meaning. Without communication, it might almost be said that the science could not exist. Without people, humans, to talk about it, care about it, and use it, it just wouldn't have a use. Be that as it may, writing about science is not writing science. Science is measured, quantified, clarified, and observed. We do not discuss written lab procedures or writing in this course. Why? Are these forms of writing not considered scientific writing or scientific language? Maybe it's because there's a difference between recording scientific information and communicating it. When we write about it or think about it in any other way, in the objective way I defined earlier, what does it become? To communicate it, we often need to dilute it. We need to explain it, define it, restrict it, limit it, and mold it into a cognitive and linguistic idea that other people can understand, that maybe perhaps somebody can even find useful. There are different ways of making science become useful and different uses for scientific knowledge. The way a doctor or astronomer uses science or scientific information is intrinsically different from the way a sales clerk uses it. Not only that, but when we write about it, we write about how we understand it. The way an individual understands it, an individual's experiences, skills, and scientific background influences the way he or she communicates science. But closely enough at the way somebody writes something, and it becomes a metacognitive exercise in itself. Perhaps so many genres of science have manifested as a result of our own needs to communicate and understand science. But in doing so, we often change the setting and information of science to fit our needs. In this case, we learn about in this class, we learn about 4 primary genres of science: communication and the science writings. We learned about some of the cultural, societal, ethical, and theological aspects of science's uses. We discuss how communicating science and framing science in the specific context of its situational medium can even change the contextual definition of the word science. We discuss variations and forms of the phenomenon, such as political science, pseudoscience, and schools teaching creationism as a science course. We discuss how different genres change the rhetorical framing of science. Now we'll discuss the 4 methods or genres of science communication that we used. The 4 genres of science that I learned about the first genre of science communication that I learned about was the review article. Audience determines this genre of scientific writing because the writing was crafted specifically to be used by a certain demographic, that being highly trained, specialized, and educated professionals. As such, the language is also highly specialized. In terms of form and content, the form is often rigid, highly structured, and even standardized, though this structure often lends to flow and simplicity because it could be applied over and over again to many different types of scientific information, and so people get used to it. The question of who the scientific information belongs to in these sort of documents is addressed by using citations. In fact, proper review article cannot be considered credible without an appropriate and well-researched and annotated list of sources that back the article. A review article is a document that contains authority, is expected to carry a well-backed authority. This implies that science communication must carry agreed-upon and standardized methods of review, backing an authority to legitimately give the document meaning. When I created a review article, I had learned the process of finding, understanding, and researching sources. This is difficult. I'd never done that sort of research before, and I wasn't sure where to start. My initial attempts were unsuccessful. I swiftly came to understand that the language in some documents is simply too specialized even for an English scholar such as myself to understand. However, based on my initial readings and assessment, I ascertained that the language would likely be effective and coherent for a highly skilled and educated member of the specific field of science and conveyed significant and dense scientific knowledge. The second topic that I tried researching for this assignment was easier for me to understand. I eventually wrote a successful review article. Though my review article only contained 6 sources, I understand that a legitimate article would need many more sources than what I used, and would be more effectively written by a trained professional in the scientific field. However, I did come to understand how much more effective it would have been if I were a trained professional, and did come to appreciate just how much time, effort, research, and collaboration it would take to write a legitimate article. The second article I wrote was for a public audience. Our audience affects this genre of writing, and by extension the context and framing of the science, by making the writer broaden and contextualize the science, or scientific information. The science has simplified and no longer requires the reader to have specialized knowledge to understand it. As such, complex science terms and language is omitted because the exact concept of the science is no longer portrayed, and the writer has a strong investment to get the audience to read the writing. The rhetorical context instead becomes one in which the writer must write with compelling, persuasive, and often entertaining language. The writer must find a way to link the specific topic to popular culture, practical uses, and speculate about possible and exciting uses. On the flip side, this genre can be used to describe how certain phenomena can have possible negative effects on human life, such as how Rachel Carson used authority of science and fable-like anecdotes to convince the audience of the possible harms of pesticides. I didn't need to face controversial communication issues in my own assignment, but I came to understand them. Science, when used as a tool of authority or persuasion, can be quite effective in changing social policy and convincing audience about how science should be understood or used. However, using the authority of science to back up unethical values or using fictitious stories, fallacies such as false claim to authority can be harmful not only to the way the public views science, but it can also lead to general public confusion about what science truly is and what its processes are, how professionals agree it should be used. The op-ed, also known as opposite of the editor, the page opposite of the editor in a newspaper or print publication, is usually written by a professional in a particular field, though it doesn't need to be. The form and content of an op-ed influenced by the audience because it has to be a certain length and appeal to a specific type of audience, generally the main demographic that reads the medium of publication. It must address a certain and often social, economic, or ethical issues in an attempt to convince or persuade the audience about some aspect of the issue. The op-ed must convey authority, though very succinctly. It doesn't need heavy citations like in a review article, but to give the article authority, the information must be absolutely correct. I wrote about Albuquerque Rapid Transit. To do this, I had to develop an opinion about it, research the varying opinions about it, address these opinions, then heavily research and justify my own opinion or claim about the issue. I had to write for a specific audience, which allowed me to adjust the style and tone of my language. The final section of this course contextualized everything we learned thus far and explained the rhetorical context and uses of science. It explained how the contextualization of documents frames how people view and use science. I already discussed it a bit at the beginning of this video. There is a rhetoric of science. The meaning, purpose, and definition of science is present inherently in the context and form of the language used. In assignment 4, I used my rhetorical and analytical skills to examine the use of content and form, and how I expected it would influence the audience's perspectives on science, and how it would force them to use their information and their professional experience to create science policy. To conclude, there are many uses for science. Science is inherently useful to humanity. The means that we use to communicate science can help or harm us. More than anything, I have learned to critically analyze documents and to understand audience purpose, both covert and overt rhetorical strategies. I've also become familiar with the processes of creating documents and the discussed scientific genres. I'm a better student and a better scholar for this knowledge. Thank you.